Well, the United States is expected to send a new and longer-range weapon to Ukraine. The ground-launched small-diameter bomb can send missiles more than 150 kilometres. It's roughly double the range of Ukraine's current longest-range weapon. That would enable the Ukrainian army to attack Russian forces from a greater distance and far behind enemy lines. The weapon is jointly made by the American aerospace company Boeing and Sweden's SAAB. Mike Martin's a senior fellow at the War Studies Department of King's College London. Welcome back to DW, Mike. Tell us more about the sort of battlefield advantage this weapon can provide.
Well, as you said, it's more than twice the range of the current longest artillery system they have. If you draw a line of 150 kilometres from the Ukrainian front lines, it actually covers all of the Russian forces in Ukraine, apart from those that are in the bottom third of the Crimean Peninsula. So what this enables Ukraine to do is hit all of those logistics and supply dumps that previously had been out of range. And so it will cause quite a lot of upset for the Russians, who will have to reconfigure how they do their supply.
Now, the European Union says it's going to double its military aid to Ukraine by training an extra 15,000 soldiers. Does that strike you as a significant contribution?
I don't think so. I think what it is part of the background, the drumbeat, if you like, of continuing supplies, continuing training. If we put that 15,000 in context, that's probably the number of casualties, killed and wounded, that Ukraine has suffered over the last, let's say, 4 to 6 months. So really what this is just keeping Ukraine at the same level of fighting.
Right. Now, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is the latest Western ally to pour cold water on Kyiv's hopes of getting fighter jets. He echoes the position of the US and, of course, Germany. Why the reluctance?
I think it is partly, we've seen this before, is that once a weapon system's announced, we've just had the tanks announced, Ukraine immediately moves on to the new, in this case, fighter jets. And I think there's a sense that the Allies want to slow down this pipeline. But more than that, fighter jets are just a different level of complexity. Not only, it's not just the jet, it's the airfields, it's all of the maintenance and supply issues. And then, of course, you have to have this huge infrastructure for controlling fighter jets in the air. So it really is not just as simple as sending planes to Ukraine.
And the latest words from the Russian president on Thursday, he said Moscow's potential to respond to Western arms deliveries to Ukraine is not limited to using armoured vehicles. What do we think he's talking about there in terms of escalation?
Well, I think it's very important to put Putin's comments in context. His main target audience is the Russian domestic audience rather than us. And of course, if Ukraine receives new weapons from the Allies, he needs to appear strong to his domestic audience. From our point of view, we've heard this before. Throughout the war, we've heard threats of escalation from Putin. And actually, quite a long time ago, the West decided that it was calling his bluff. And as we've seen, there has been no escalation either to other countries or to nuclear weapons or to anything. And so really we must consider that the Russian domestic population is the main target of Putin's comments.
Thanks for that, Mike. As ever, very clear. Thank you so much. Mike Martin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his country deserves to start talks on joining the European Union this year. Now, the comments in his nightly address follow initial meetings with Commission President Ursula von der Leyen ahead of a joint EU-Ukraine summit later today in Kyiv. But as Russia's war in Ukraine approaches its first anniversary, Kyiv's dream of EU membership is unlikely to be achieved quickly.
There was the feel of a family get-together as members of the EU Commission gathered in Kyiv for a historic joint meeting with the Ukrainian government. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said they were there to show Europe stands as firmly as ever with Ukraine in its war with Russia.
Our presence in Kyiv today gives a very clear signal. The whole of the European Union is in this with Ukraine for the long haul, and we will stand up for Ukraine as we stand up for the fundamental rights and the respect of the international law.
But amidst all the smiles and solidarity sits another issue. Ukraine's President Volodomyr Zelenskyy wants Ukraine to become a fully fledged member of the EU family, and quickly.
You prepared your application for the European Union membership brilliantly. I know it by experience. You became a candidate country while fighting an invasion. You continue to make impressive progress to meet the 7 steps of the Commission's opinion.
Part of that progress is a renewed crackdown on corruption, including this raid at the home of one of Ukraine's most prominent billionaires just a day before the EU team's arrival in Kyiv. A timely demonstration of Zelenskyy's determination to prove to doubters in Europe that he and his government can be trusted, not only as a future EU member state, but also with billions in aid, as and when the country starts to rebuild.
Regarding the reconstruction, there were a lot of discussions on various levels in Europe regarding the rebuilding of our country after the war. Now it is time, I think, for more concrete details. Both the fast reconstruction and the fast financing of this process are important.
In the here and now, the EU has promised to continue its support for Ukraine by hitting Russia with a fresh wave of sanctions. But when it comes to EU membership, it looks like President Zelenskyy will just have to wait.
Straight to the Ukrainian capital then, where we join our correspondent Max Sander. Morning, Max. What emerged from yesterday's talks between EU officials and their Ukrainian counterparts?
Right, Phil. So we had this massive delegation in town yesterday, 16 EU commissioners in total, who met with their counterparts to discuss and oversee the bloc's main initiatives here. So these talks are an ongoing process, and we don't know much about what exactly has been going on, but there have been some announcements made yesterday in terms of further EU support to Ukraine. One of them on the military side, the EU has committed to train an additional 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers on EU territory, and on the side of the economy related to business, the EU will make it easier for Ukrainian businesses to access funds and projects in the EU in order to help them tie Ukraine and the EU closer together.
And a smaller meeting later today between President Zelenskyy and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. What's expected there?
Right, so this is a largely symbolic visit, right? This is about sending a message, showing Ukrainians that the EU is still at their side and supporting them along the way and building towards a common future. So we don't expect any groundbreaking announcements today, but we know a few things about the talking points today. One of the main issues is going to be EU integration and EU accession. Now, the Commission has identified 7 areas where it's asking Ukraine to work on. We're not going to expect any announcements on how this accession process will continue. Not any concrete steps will be announced. Most likely this will happen in spring, but this will definitely be discussed. Another issue on the agenda is the response to Russian aggression. We heard it already, a 10th package of sanctions and military aid. That's something that's being discussed. And to name another one, that's going to be global food security. EU will see how to further help Ukraine move grain out of its ports, by helping Ukraine but also helping much of the developing world that very heavily depends on grain and food security.
And so would it be fair to say, Max, that despite this high-level delegation and Ursula von der Leyen's warm words, there is no real prospect of Ukraine joining the European Union anytime soon?
Yeah, well, that's a million-dollar question. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen yesterday, she praised Zelenskyy's government for cracking down on corruption, for working very hard and working very quickly on meeting these targets that have been identified. But the matter of the fact is that joining the EU, integrating, the accession process is a multi-level process. It's very complicated, and the country has to undergo the exact same scrutiny as any other country that wants to join the EU. So there are 35 chapters which will be used to vet the entire system, ranging from the judiciary to agriculture to transportation to the economy, and this takes time. And where Ukraine is not at the same level or not meeting the expectations of the EU, will have to undergo a reform process, and this could take years, if not decades.
Thanks for that, Max. Max Zander in Kyiv. Well, fears of potential escalation in this war, threats from Vladimir Putin, and concerns about adverse impacts on Europe's economy are just some of the reasons Germany was so slow to allow its tanks to be sent to Ukraine. So now that Berlin has given the green light, what do Germans think of the way their government has handled this conflict? Well, the results of the latest Infratest DMAP poll make interesting reading. More than a third of respondents say they're satisfied or very satisfied with what's being done in their name, while a higher number say they are less satisfied, and 22% of Germans are not satisfied at all. So our political correspondent Hans Brandt can talk us through these figures. Welcome, Hans. What do you make of this?
Well, what one can see is that the support for the German government, for Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the policy in Ukraine remains strong, but the support is not as total as it may have been before. The level of support for the government of people that basically agree with what the government is doing has remained constant over the last few months, more or less constant. But the number of people who are starting to have doubts is increasing, and that's what's being reflected in these figures. So that is one of the reasons why Olaf Scholz and the German government are so careful about their decision-making. So people are saying so hesitant about what they decide, because they are very concerned that they need to take along the German population in their decision-making.
Now, pollsters also asked about sending weapons to Ukraine. And here, too, opinions seem divided. 44% say Germany is providing enough weapons, following that decision to send the Leopard tanks in, of course. But about a third say Berlin's doing too much. Hans, are Germans becoming less supportive of this war?
I think that's, no, you can't really put it that way. What has happened here in the past month is, in fact, that decision to send main battle tanks to Ukraine, which was very controversial for many months. And that decision is basically supported by voters. But there has been a significant swing in this poll, this question, which has been asked repeatedly over the months. And in the past month, there's been a swing of more than 10% towards people who say it's enough now, away from people who used to say that it was not enough. So the decision to send the main battle tanks and the following discussion about whether or not to send fighter jets to Ukraine, that is certainly something that is moving German opinion. People seem to say now it's enough for now and no more weapons to Ukraine at the moment. So there again, the government is balancing its decisions very, very carefully, also against the background of these opinions.
Now, it looks as if some Germans are still hoping for a diplomatic solution. We have a third who think that Germany is doing enough to try and end the war by diplomatic means, but as many as 58% saying that not enough is being done. So we've been out on the streets of Berlin to hear some views. We'll hear from them and then come back to you, Hans.
Diplomacy, OK, but if only one side does diplomacy and the other doesn't play along or just pretends and nothing happens, then it's of no use. These are very difficult decisions. One should never forget that. It's super difficult to weigh all of that up. But I think overall it's fine. They are very hesitant and reserved. Everything should have happened much faster.
Hans Brandt, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says he'll keep talking to Vladimir Putin on the phone. Is there any prospect of success by these means?
Well, at the moment, there doesn't seem very much prospect of success by these means. The last time the two spoke with each other is 2 months ago in early December, as far as we know. That's what's been publicly announced on both sides, and those discussions really led nowhere. It was both sides stating their positions, attacking each other, basically. They speak for long times, for an hour or maybe sometimes more, but the outcome of that is nothing, basically. So. But still, in German society, there is this ingrained fear that Germany could be pulled into this war, that Germany, which after all fought a terrible war against the Russians, as we just saw in the commemoration of the Stalingrad battle yesterday, that all of these parts of history could in some sense be repeated. So concern amongst the German public is great, and the hope that some form of diplomatic solution can be found is very widespread.
Political correspondent Hans Brandt, thank you so much.